Welcome back, everyone. This week, we're jumping right into redundancy and life after redundancy, life during redundancy, and also how to navigate life in general, because redundancies are so unspoken about. They're so uncommon to kind of share stories about, and also I feel like there are tips and tricks that we can talk about to ensure that we can try and avoid redundancy as much as possible, because there's a huge element to redundancies that are unpredictable, I think. And we can also ensure that financially we're not taking too many risks. We're not putting all our eggs in one basket. And I think there's loads of ground we can cover in this episode to make sure that people feel confident in their careers, that no matter what happens, that there are certain avenues that they can take to stay afloat and still aim for big things. But let's start, because Farah, I think everyone
by
knows,
now, yeah,
hopefully, who's been listening, that you recently went through a redundancy yourself. So do you want to talk a little bit about kind of like how that was for you during and after, and like what that process was kind of like and how you felt?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously it's something that I only been through once, and like you said, it's something people don't talk about. So I had no idea what to expect when the process kind of came about, and even during it, it was, honestly, looking back, it was a bit of a blur. Like that whole period of time, I don't remember a lot of it, I'm gonna be honest. And I think it's mainly because I just had so much going on life-wise. Like it just came at a weird time for me. I was literally in the middle of getting married. So I was already like out of work while the whole kind of process was taking place. Because of that, like I had leave planned and stuff. Yeah, it's a weird process to go through, because you go through it knowing that, you know, there's other colleagues that are also potentially going to be up for the same thing or not. And then everyone kind of finds out at the same time, like who's staying, who's going. You have a lot of managers that are like really desperate to support you, but also have no say or control in anything that's going on. So there's also like a battle for them, kind of dealing with like wanting to support you, but also not knowing what to do and what the right thing to say is. I think it's a tricky thing to go through, because it's not really like the fault of the individual, or there's not really anything that can be done to avoid it. Like if a business wants to make changes to their business and the changes result in people needing them having to cut down team sizes or people needing to leave, that's just what's going to happen. So I think there isn't really anything you can do to avoid being made redundant, because it's not like it's performance based. There's nothing about your specific role other than the fact that, like, if someone else decides that your role's not needed, that's not really something that you have any control over. So the only thing I can say is just have a backup. Like in this day and age, I don't really think any of us should really feel the need to rely solely on a 9 to 5, and that's definitely not what I have done the entire time I've been working, essentially. So when that process did come around, I have spoken about this a lot on my page, so I feel like a bit of a broken record, but during this period of time, I had already gone through a good few years of knowing that this wasn't my forever job, knowing that there was something else out there for me that I could still make money out of and maybe enjoy more. Now, don't get me wrong, I was so grateful for my job. I was so grateful for the experience of working there, but I knew that that wasn't my forever thing. So when redundancy came up and when I was chosen and when all these things were happening to me, I didn't feel like that. I felt like it was happening for me. I felt like there was a bigger purpose, and I wasn't really that upset. I'm not gonna lie. Of course, like, it's very scary. I'm not discounting that at all. I was terrified, and Deb, you know, I was like, what the hell is happening? Because it's not in your control, and I wasn't at that point in time. I don't know if I was ready to leave. Like, in my mind, I don't think I was ready, but I do think like there was a good reason for it, and I'm not bitter about it. I had a really good experience with all my team members and stuff, like in that end, like last few weeks. Like, everyone was really supportive, really understanding of like just taking work off my plate and just trying to do things to actually help me get a new role. I would say if you're in the position where you are just, that's your only thing you've got going on, your 9 to 5, and you are actually having to move from one 9 to 5 to another, then make the use of the connections that you've built, because I had all the opportunity to actually lean on my team, and a lot of my managers were very forthcoming in giving me their personal email addresses, like helping me with CV and helping me to get another job, essentially, like offering their connections at different firms. Like they were very, very supportive in that, and just basically trying to do the most to help soften the blow, I guess, and help me kind of move into a new direction. So make use of that if you're someone that does want to join a new firm and continue that area of work that you're working in just somewhere else. Because I think when you're in that bubble and when you're stressed, the fact that you're losing your job and you've got all this going on and you've got so much to do, you probably won't even be thinking straight when those are like when people. So I would just say pay attention to that, because if people offer you help, take it. I was in a position where I had already built a lot of stuff outside of work, so I wasn't really in the mindset that I wanted to jump back into a new 9 to 5. So I didn't take on those opportunities yet. So it might be something I do in the future, and I still have the contacts that I worked with. I was in a place, very fortunately, that I could lean on my side hustle income and what I'd built outside of work. So that is what I'm essentially doing at the moment. And let me tell you, the opportunities that come out of just doing stuff that's, I guess, freelance is the right word, maybe, or just not strictly related to a corporate job, is actually insane. Like, something I haven't even told you yet is that I've actually been offered like basically a part-time job recently.
Oh my God, wow.
Related to TikTok, which is so cool. And it's something,
and so much more aligned, I guess, to your like genuine interests.
Yeah, it's definitely something more interesting. I don't know how it's going to go because it's very new as well, but I'm definitely excited about it. And it's something that's going to require a whole new skill set from me as well. And I think I like the idea of that, because people assume if you're not in corporate, then you're not like using any skills or knowledge or expertise, and you're not a smart person. I feel like that's a very big like reputation that you get if you kind of leave that world, that, oh, she's not going to be using any skills, she's just going to be doing like a menial job. But actually, like, there's so many different skills required for different types of jobs. So I'm really excited about that. And the free time that I've gained from not being tied to a 9 to 5 has opened so many doors for me to earn monies. to earn money. I was trying to say like streams of money at the same time, but earn money via like loads of different income streams, which is actually should be the goal for everyone. I think it's really important for us all to have this idea of earning money via different income streams, which is a lot easier to do when you're not tied to a 9 to 5 that's pulling 40, sometimes 50 hours a week out of you, because then it becomes a little bit, almost impossible.
Yeah, I mean, your experience is like, it's unique what's happened to you, because obviously you've built up your socials for a while you were also working. And so when the redundancy happened, and also when it was looming, I guess, you didn't have as much of a sense of dread. It was just more that like, this is a new, and it's a worrying thing when it happens, so it causes a lot of like anxiety, and like because so much is up in the air, you don't have control, you don't have answers when you need them, and it can tend to be like not a nice experience for most people. But because you had kind of socials and you were aware of income streams, and you're like financially you're super sensible, so you had a lot of these things in the back of your mind while this was happening. And I can understand that for like maybe someone who doesn't have socials, or maybe hasn't built a brand or a personal brand, that when a redundancy looms, or the R word is even ever mentioned at work, it's like instant panic, instant what do I do, instant I'm gonna be broke, I won't be able to afford anything. And I think there's a lot of stuff that anyone listening can take away from what you've done to ensure that they're never in that kind of position. And we're not telling you to go out right now and become an influencer. I think there are things that you can do that ensure that you always have opportunities available to you, regardless of whether the pressure is on. And I think that's a really important part that I've taken away from what has happened to you, and like a lot of my friends as well, is that I don't want to face a redundancy to then push me to build a network, build a personal brand, start reaching out, start recognizing and understanding the value of like the job that I've done and how I've applied things to my role. I'm going to do that in the background regardless of any kind of thing happening, so that if a redundancy ever happens, I'm not under pressure to actually reach out. I have a network I can reach out to. I have a brand I can rely on. Like, I don't need to sell myself under pressure, essentially. And I think that's a really important thing for especially young people to do. And that ties in with like not always having all of your eggs in one basket. Like, you can post once a week on LinkedIn about what you're doing at work, but not be side hustling after work. Like, you don't have to do it all. But I think doing one of them over time is super, super important. And I think redundancy also calls about like a certain set of skills that I think are important for people to have when you're kind of thinking about your professional career or like how you're going to earn money during your life. I think negotiation and networking skills are really important and have come about as being really important, as it's what I've taken away from seeing this redundancy process like go through. And with the negotiation skills, do you think you used any at all, like when you were going through redundancy, or like when you left, like in your social media career now? Like, are you negotiating your rates a bit higher? Are you like, how are you kind of, did you use those skills at all, like when all of that was going down?
I think when it comes to my socials, I think I was already thankfully in quite a good place in terms of like the work that I was getting in. It wasn't so much of a concern for me to kind of start scrambling to like be earning extra. Plus, when you get made redundant, they do give you money for it, so you do get the monetary support so that you do have a buffer. So even if you were wanting to find another job, you essentially get, depending on how many years you've worked at the firm and some other factors, you get a chunk of money that will essentially sustain you for a couple of months while you're in your job search. I want to put it in people's heads that redundancy actually isn't as scary as the word sounds, because when you're going through it, my experience is based on a very big corporate firm, so people working at different firms might have different experience, but in my experience, because a lot of people, when you hear the word, and when I heard the word before I went through it, and I know I had a bit of a unique experience going through it, but still it sounds a lot more terrifying than it actually is. And when you do work for a big firm, the amount of support that you actually get to first find a different job, like they give you so many options. This is again in my experience, so like take it with a pinch of salt, but I still do want to make people aware that it's not just a case of you get told, yeah, you're not needed anymore, off you go in a month's time. Like, it's not a case that you kind of just have to go and scramble and figure things out for yourselves and you're just left in the lurch a little bit. Like, you are given a lot of support in terms of job hunting. You're given the opportunity to, I was given the opportunity to go and find another job within the firm and then apply internally. So there were like loads of different, whether that was abroad or still in the UK, there were loads of job options that I could have picked from, and then I would have just gone through the normal interview process. You are given like the support in doing that. You're given CV support. You're given, like I mentioned, your own network, and the people that you work with are very supportive in terms of helping you. Because when you work at these big firms, like, people have so many connections to people in other companies and their clients that they work for. So the pool is kind of endless when you think about how many people you're connected to at a firm like that. So when these people offer the support, that's why I say just take it. If you're someone that doesn't really have anything else to fall back on, the support is there. So I just want to like make sure people aren't too terrified, because it's just the nature of work. Like, these things happen, but as long as you kind of know what your options are and you also have your own back, which is why I would always suggest having something outside of work. You don't have to be an influencer, even a content creator. You could have any kind of skill. You could be someone completely faceless that does, I don't know, makes digital products or edits stuff, or script writes, blog posts, like anything. There's so many things you can do that you don't necessarily have to show your face. Something that you could do alongside working a corporate job, which I know is tricky to juggle, but it just gives you that extra source of income, so that if something did happen with your work or your main source of income, you're not totally left starting from scratch again.
Networking skills, I think, are really important before, during, and after a redundancy. And obviously, when I'm speaking throughout this episode, like, I'm not speaking as someone who's gone through this process, but I am speaking from someone who's like witnessed friends and colleagues go through the process and think, okay, how would I navigate the situation if it were to happen to me? And also, like, how can we help people who don't have like online brands already? Because both of us have brands that we can rely on if anything ever happened. And I mean, you relied on it because it happened. But I think with networking skills, that's like an element of a redundancy that you can control. Like, because redundancies in themselves are so uncontrollable, what you need to do is control the controllables. And your professional network is something that you can build regardless of whatever position you are in right now. Like today, right now, listening to this episode, you could engage with people on LinkedIn about what you've done at work. You can like show off your achievements. You can post about what you're doing without necessarily doing anything extra, if that makes sense. Like you can take the role you're doing and then just make yourself really loud about it and like build an online brand. Potentially LinkedIn like is a great place to start if you don't want to actually, set up like a part-time business or build like a personal brand online on social media like myself and Farah have done. I think posting on LinkedIn is a great way to just like engage your immediate network and show them what you're doing, talk about what you're doing, whatever that is. And you can also start to like take that, I think, a few levels higher. Like you can start to connect with people in your network and actually offer value. Like, is there anything that you're really good at that you can actually leverage and use for other people to be an important part of their network? Because I think generosity is a really important part of networking that essentially just increases your karma. Like the more you give, the more you'll come to people's minds when they have opportunities for you, or when, karma wants to come back to you. Like you just kind of set the world up in that way. And you have to balance doing this, I think, with like the time that you do have with your job. I'm not telling you to spend all of your time outside of work giving things for free to people. I'm saying don't just sit there and post on LinkedIn once a week and then kind of sit back, kind of work on building the network, offering value to your network. And offering value also helps you develop skills and like show off those skills. Like the more you offer value based on a certain skill that you have, the better of a skill you'll build in that area, like the better known you'll be for offering that skill. And if you work for like bigger firms like Farah did and I do, you can offer that skill within your own network within the firm. Like this doesn't have to be to strangers. And by doing that, you'll become well known for that skill, and like you become almost more employable in that way, whether that's in or outside the firm. And by doing this as well, so it kind of leveling up these skills. So you're building your network, you're offering value. The more you do this, the more visible you'll be to your actual network. Like you want to be the first person that pops up in someone's head when they have an opportunity or a project or anything that they need someone to help with. You might not even be the right person, but if you're constantly popping up somewhere, you might be the first person that just comes up into their head, and you want to be that person all the time. And it increases the chances of being able to find opportunities faster if a redundancy ever happens. And also if a redundancy never happens, it helps you find opportunities that are more aligned to what you're good at or what you want to do as well. And yeah, like I've mentioned LinkedIn already, but I think social media can really be leveraged to help people in their professional careers in a way that doesn't have to necessarily mean making content. I think writing about what you're good at is just a great place to start, and I think LinkedIn is a great place to start. And if you want to take that further with TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, I'm just guessing, that's a really great way to just actually take everything I've just said and level that up into a full-on personal brand. Because if anyone was ever going to hire someone, having a visible, valuable personal brand will set you apart from everyone else who's applying for any job ever. Because it's more and more common these days to actually build a personal brand. And you know what? I remember even being early days in my career and people would say, build a brand for yourself. Your personal brand matters. And I would always think that is so cringy. Like, why would I build a personal brand? I will just do hard work and I'll do it well and people will notice. It's completely false. Like you have to do the work that matters, make sure you're shouting about that work, and that forms your personal brand. Like, whether you know it or not, you have one. So build on it and utilize it so that if times like redundancy ever roll around, you have opportunities and you've created them for yourself. And that's something that I've really taken away from like watching a redundancy happen, and like knowing that it can be so unpredictable, because that the whole building a network and building a personal brand is something that you can fully control whether you're going through a redundancy or not. And it gives you that emotional comfort blanket as well, to be honest. Like, if you have a personal brand you can rely on, and you know you have skills that you can rely on and offer people value from, it's very comforting to know that, you know, you're not left with nothing if you are told, okay, your job doesn't exist anymore on Monday, and that's it, because those scenarios happen as well. So yeah, I think combining, you know, like the negotiation skills and networking skills and building that personal brand is something that we can all do today. Like myself included, I don't think I do it enough in a professional sense, to take away and do to make sure you're always covered in case of anything happening. But you also touched on not relying on one, like not putting all of your eggs in one basket and like multiple streams of income. What are your thoughts on that? On for someone listening who potentially doesn't have social media or has relied on their 9 to 5, like since they left uni or whatever, got their first job, what would you say to someone who wants to diversify their income?
I would say look at what skills and interests you have. Well, interests outside of work. What skills that maybe you have learned via work or otherwise, and what you can monetize. I know there is like so much stickiness when it comes to this idea of having to monetize all your hobbies and everything that you're interested in, but there's so much opportunity out there, and there's so many ways that you can do it in a healthy way where you do have something that you're interested in, you're really good at. There's no harm in making money from that. So I would just have a sit down with yourself. If there's something that you already see as a hobby, I think the only thing I can really think in my head is the content creation, because that's really what I do. But there is plenty of other things. It's just down to what your interests are. And a lot of people, when you're interested in something, it's easy to get good at as well. So even if it's something that you've not ever started before, but it's something that you've always wondered or been intrigued by, just give it a go. I feel like when you have the security of your full-time job, you have nothing to lose by trying something out. And I think that's why it's best to start something while you're working, because then you have the freedom. Like if you start it and then you realize, actually, this isn't really what I thought it was, I'm not that interested in it, this is not something I want to sustain, you can let it go and it won't affect you in any way, because you've still got your main source of income. Don't get me wrong, I completely understand the difficulty of balancing a full-time job with trying to do stuff outside of work, but it's still the best time to do it, I think, because you have the buffer and you have the stability of your full-time job to experiment with other things, to try out different side hustles, different hobbies you can make money from, and you can be very flexible with them as well. You don't have to like make something stick. You don't have to really pressurize yourself. And then there's also other things like learning about investing, and there's other ways that you can grow your money and just become a bit more financially literate, where you're not just focused on that salary that you're getting month on month, but you actually are thinking beyond that and thinking long term and thinking, actually, I could save all this money that I'm earning month on month, but if I invested it in stocks and shares, or if I opened up an ISA and I actually, you know, put my money towards something else and could potentially grow it, then that could alleviate some of the pressure as well, because later down the line, you'll probably end up with a bigger pot than what you started with. It's just a case of researching and really taking that time to learn more about the different ways that money can be made, because there are so many different ways. I just think the only one we're ever taught is get a job, sit in the office and wait for your wage to come in every month.
Yeah, well, that's the whole capitalism mindset, isn't it? They want us to be focused on one thing and have only one source of income and have a very limited source of income as well. But completely agree with what you said about starting a business. I think obviously there's a line between like, you don't go away and monetize all of your hobbies and passions, because yes, you'll be miserable. But I am so passionate about entrepreneurship in terms of what it can do to your life, to your skills, to your personal brand. And like having a little side hustle it'll always be a good thing, especially in this day and age where like we've got the cost of living crisis, we've got the economy going like literally up and down all the time. Like you having a little bit of extra money, whether that's topping up your savings every now and then or if it's just weekend money, that's never going to be something that is a bad thing in this day and age. And I think, like you said, you can just drop it if it becomes too much. We're not telling you to monetize and scale and quit your job. We're telling you to find different ways for your bank account to be topped up. And you also hit the nail on the head in terms of like, okay, well, what are the other ways that we can actually grow our money? And if that is the way you want to think as well, in terms of like, okay, we need to start investing, we also need to open up the conversation around, if you're earning all of your money from 1 9 to 5, you absolutely cannot be spending all of that money every single month. And I have been this person. It's the whole reason I started my social media, is because I was this person and I got into debt because I was this person. But that's such a big risk, because if you're constantly spending all of your money month to month and then literally on Monday you get made redundant, that I can't even imagine the level of panic that would induce in me, especially being someone who was like prone to debt before as well. So you have to think about how you're allocating your income and what you're doing with the money you are currently earning before you think about earning more. Because if you're going to go away, set up a side business and earn a little bit more weekend money or top up your savings, but you're literally like spending everything else, you're not going to be in a better off position if you lose your job. So what I would highly recommend everyone to think about is, okay, if we're going to invest our money, we're also going to save a bit of our money. And whatever money we're saving, we're making sure that that's being maximized and utilized in like high interest savings accounts. We want to make sure that we've got very minimal consumer debt. We don't want to be in debt. And if we are in debt, it's like, I think the best types of debt to have are like mortgages, student loans, and cars and stuff, right? Like what I'm saying is credit card debt. If you're in credit card debt, work on clearing that before you start a side business. Make sure that you've got good spending habits before you start trying to increase your income. Because what I'm essentially trying to prevent anyone from doing is like earning more money but then just spending it all, because that's redundant in itself, pun intended.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, I think I always assume that people have the same like habits, but they actually don't. Like, yeah, people sometimes do genuinely just spend their entire wage, which is, when you do have that as your only income, that is a terrifying way to operate. Because even when I was working, knowing that I had a side hustle, I still had an emergency pot where if anything was to happen, I would be able to dip into that. And that was a good 3-4 months equivalent of my salary. Even if the redundancy pay or anything didn't come through, then I still would have had that to fall back on. So you do have to make sure you're protecting yourself in every way. Don't ever assume that things are just going to be fine and dandy, because I think you also are conditioned to believe that corporate jobs are the most safe and secure place to be. And yeah, I guess I learned otherwise.
Yeah.
But in general, like, it's just so important for people to not take for granted their salary just because it's regular now. Things could change and you might not even be made redundant. What if you get ill and you only get a certain amount of sick pay before, you like, there's so many things that could happen that could impact your money coming in month on month. So that's why, like, even redundancy aside, it's always a good idea to make sure, like, even if you know for sure that you would never have the risk of being made redundant for whatever reason, you still should be implementing these practices that Dev mentioned and being very just careful and protect yourself with your money, because you just don't know what could happen. And like, what seems impossible can happen. So you have to be smart when it comes to money. And then when you are put in positions where, because a lot of people have actually messaged me since I posted about my redundancy, and they've said things like, I was made redundant too. It's been 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. I still can't find a job. I'm struggling. I'm getting panicked now. And people are really worried about them not finding something else, or kind of, things not turning out how they expected it to. And all I can say is two things here is, obviously, if you've done that pre-work of like protecting yourself and you've had that buffer, then hopefully that time will not feel so panicked and stressful, because you'll still have enough to cover your expenses while you're still looking for a job, going through the interview process even after your old job is finished. So that's the position I was in, where I still was able to sustain myself while letting things pick up outside of the job that I was no longer in. And then the other thing is your money mindset and your attitude towards money. I feel like at a time like this is probably the most important time to actually focus on that and start becoming really serious about like your attitude towards money. Because I think when you're in a job and you know what pay's coming in month on month, it's very easy to just, coast it, and like you don't really have any financial worries. And it's only when that panic sets in and you feel like you're not having enough and you feel like things aren't, you're not as stable as you once were, that's where you need to be really strong mentally when it comes to your mindset towards money. Because then you end up in this place where once you get stuck in that rut of having a lack mindset, that's all you're going to start to see, and you'll end up spiraling down a path that you really don't want to go down. So I think that's also worth saying, is don't let yourself become that person that starts building a scarcity mindset if you weren't someone that was like that before, or even if you were like that before but it was kind of placated, or it wasn't really noticed because you had this regular income month on month. Because people generally sometimes do go through periods where they have to take a break out of work, or there is a period of time where they're without that regular income. So I think it's important to kind of keep yourself mentally screwed on a little bit when it comes to just how you're interpreting the situation and how you are just your mindset towards it, because that can just make things doubly hard. Like, you're already in this situation where you've got to find money from nothing and you've got to find a new job. So you don't want yourself to you don't want your mind to put yourself in a position where it's made harder, because now you're thinking, oh, money's going to come by so difficultly and money's not going to come my way and it's taken this long and that means I'm just like failing, and, just putting yourself in that negative mindset overall. So, getting your affirmations out and doing all those gratitude things is really going to help you in this time, I think, because it's important.
Yeah, completely agree. I think scarcity mindset is essentially that mindset of thinking there's not enough for me, whether that is opportunities, jobs, money, connections. It's the idea of like, there's not enough for me, and that causes that panic. It causes you to like take everything, hold it tightly, and like not let it go. Or, I mean, I was the type of person to be like, okay, I'm going to spend as much as I can because it's never going to come back, kind of thing. Yeah. So I think to combat that, create that sense of there is enough for me, or create that comfort of there could be enough for me if I try. And we've talked about it already. I spoke about it at the beginning of the episode. Build a personal brand, post on LinkedIn about what you do, because that shows other people who you are. It shows other people what you're good at, and it creates opportunities for you in the future. And you touched on an emergency fund, which is so important. And I remember when I started getting into money and personal finance, and the first thing that was recommended was building an emergency fund. And I used to think like, well, I can do that later because like everything's fine now. Like, why would I need an emergency fund? And it's that whole idea of like, oh, big corporate is so comfortable, like I'll be fine. But an emergency is literally an emergency. You're never going to know when it's going to come. And also having an emergency fund, whether that's 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, just knowing that it's there will also help combat that sense of scarcity. Because again, if you feel like, oh, there's not enough money for me out there if I lose my job, if you have an emergency fund sitting in your back pocket, that fear is just knocked down a few pegs, and that's all you really need to do to try and combat those feelings. But I will just die on the hill that like having a side business and having a personal brand that you actively contribute to every single day, often, is just so important, and it protects you in ways that are worth the cringiness of building those things. So yeah, I think that would just be my like number one takeaway for anyone listening, whether you're going through a redundancy or not, and actually more so if you're not going through a redundancy. You have the freedom and time to build that brand without pressure. So go and do it right now. Like literally go on LinkedIn and post about something you did at work. I literally don't care how cringy it is or how cringy it feels to do it, because have you heard of that cringe mountain as well?
Not the mountain, but I did want to emphasize that how uncomfortable it does feel to do those things, especially when you're not used to it. Like the type of person that just wants to get on with their work and be recognized for the work that they're doing. It feels so disgusting to have to then go and shout about your work. And I totally relate to that and understand it. And that is something that I definitely struggle with at work, is like shouting about what I was doing, because I just expected people to know if I was doing it, then you should see it. But no, you're so right.
The world doesn't work like that.
You have to be telling people all the time what are you doing and what you're achieving, because otherwise people aren't paying attention. They're just looking at themselves or who else is shouting about their own achievements.
Yeah, exactly. And then when they're looking for someone to fulfill a role, or they've got a job that comes up and they want to find the perfect person for it, they're just going to go to the people that are visible. And the people that are visible are the people that are posting. Or not even just posting, but like shouting about what they've done. So you just, yeah, it's the number one padding. That, an emergency fund. And if you can't build an emergency fund right now, making sure that you are consumer debt free and you're able to get to a position of building an emergency fund, I think would be really great first steps for anyone to take to, you know, get into a position where they are feeling comfortable that if anything bad happened, there's enough opportunity, money and jobs out there to sustain you. But yeah, I did also want to recognize that like this is, I know redundancy is a sensitive topic and it is like a difficult thing to talk about. So if you are struggling with it, we know that it's crap. Like I've had to support my friends through it, and you know, it's just it's not a nice process just because of how uncontrollable it is. But I hope you can take on the stuff that we've spoken about in this episode to put yourself in the best position to be employable and find jobs that you want to do and that will pay the bills, because that's the priority at the end of the day.
Yeah, and hopefully this, like even just hearing about my experience, for example, makes you realise that it doesn't always have to be a terrifying thing where you're just kind of left in the lurch. Like it doesn't have to be that way, even though it appears to be that way when looking on the outside, when you don't really realise the ins and outs and you haven't really thought about anything beyond your 9 to 5 in terms of how you're going to make money. So just know that there are other options and ways to protect yourself, and hopefully this has given you a bit of insight into how you can do that.
We hope that was a helpful episode to talk about, and we hope it was slightly inspiring, if not comforting, for anyone who is going through the process or fears the process massively. I do. We hope that if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, that you'll give us a rating, and let us know, you know, like tell us if there's anything or if there are ways that we can improve as hosts as well, because we want to be something that you want to listen to and something that is valuable to you as well. So let us know if there's anything that we can do to be better hosts, because that's what we want to be. If you're listening on YouTube, leave us a comment and give us a little like, a little thumbs up, subscribe. I always wave when I mention YouTube. And thank you for listening. We'll see you and hear you, I guess, next week. Bye.
Bye.